What's happening, HC Nation? This is Zach Edwards with another episode of the Adventure Box Podcast. That's right, we are talking about everything history, starting off with our sponsors, Historical Conquest. Yes, this is my company, but it's a game that is really fun, and you get to play with history. Think of it like a Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, Magic, but of history. Plays like the game of Risk, but again, every card, instead of little figures, every card is a historical person in history, so you can actually learn about them as you're playing. You don't need to know anything about it, about history, in order to play, but you're going to learn so much because you're playing. So, best of both worlds. You get to play, and you get to learn, and it doesn't take a ton of mind power to be able to do it. It's like that, just by playing it. Guaranteed. Okay, so you'll actually, I can't say guaranteed. Let me restate that. I can't guarantee it because it depends on the person, but when we've done our tests, it's majority, high majority, like 80 to 90%. All those that play the game can learn history while playing it. They'll know names, they'll know dates, they'll know history. Dates not as much as important, but the names and what they did, that's what's so important. Okay, so that aside, those are our sponsors, so put Historical Conquest to the side. Today we're going to be talking about something really important. This is actually one of the most pivotal moments in U.S. history that people don't really talk about. Now, if you were here last week, Monday and Wednesday, you heard something about the the War of 1812. This is what we're going to be talking about today, but today it's a little bit deeper. We're going to actually talk about some of the land battles that actually happened. Now, as you know, there are few. It was not like the American Revolution. It was not like the Civil War. There was not a lot of land battles. But this one was essential to learn about. And that starts with the burning of D.C. Yes, that's right. One of the most pivotal moments. The White House gets burned down completely to the ground. And we have to rebuild. But, again, not many people talk about this. And it's such an important part. So today, let's imagine a foreign army walking into your national capital. Then they go in and they don't just visit the national capital, they burn it to the floor. Now, not every single building, but buildings like the Capitol, the White House, most of the federal buildings, burn them to the ground. Then, just weeks later, sending in the dark, as bombs explode overhead, and you're watching your flag still flying at dawn. Gives you a little bit of pride in there, right? Okay, so these are two events that we're going to be talking about today. What happened in D.C. and what happened in Baltimore. Now, this is going to be the defense of the fort in Baltimore. But we'll get into that as we get there. So first off, the burning of D.C. What actually happened? Now, by 1914, this is 2 years after they declared war on Britain, that is, the United States declared the war, some things that actually happened during this point. So this stretch of time. First, in Europe, Napoleon was defeated. What happens if all of a sudden your enemy, who you're putting all your time and effort towards fighting, is now defeated? Well, you have the ability to send over your troops to something else that's really important. So it freed up British troops to reinforce the war in the Americas. And in Canada, which you know we lost pretty poorly, the U.S. had failed to gain ground. So British really didn't need to go up to Canada to defend it. It was already defended. It's funny because some people like to say the French are weak. They weren't then. And they can say that the Canadians are weak. Well, maybe compared to the U.S. Army now, but they kicked our butts back a long time ago. So, I mean, hat tip to the Canadians back then. Well, I guess the British that were in Canada, they're getting more than a hat tip. Now, at sea, the American privateers had won scores of victories, tons of them. But the British blockades were basically still strangling the U.S. trade market. We couldn't trade with any other nation. Now, France, Britain, they were out of the fight. We could not trade with them. We had embargoes on those two countries. Everyone else we could trade with, except if we couldn't get our supplies there because the British were blocking all of our stuff. So, now comes August 1814. Again, 2 years after we declared war on Britain. A British force of around 4,500 troops. They were under the authority, or their commanding officer was Major Green Robert Ross. And he landed in Benedict, Maryland. Benedict, Maryland. Why in the world would we go after like Benedict Arnold? Well, actually, I'm not quite sure it's actually called that after the traitor Benedict Arnold. But let's check this out. Where's Benedict? Now there's DC. And from DC, just a hop, skip, and a jump down south from there. So, why did they go there? Because they had a natural way of floating up ships to this little triangle to come to Washington, D.C., which I lost. Was it there? No. Was it here? Oh, come on. Let's do this. Let's check the directions. What are the directions? Because I want to know this. From Washington, D.C. to Benedict, Maryland. And actually, we're going to switch it. Flip the switch and go more for walking. Walking, it was 15 hours. It was not that far away. So, the normal walking route now, of course, they had roads and they have streets and they have paths and such. They didn't exactly have that at this time. But, still didn't stop the British. Their target was Washington, D.C., up here. And yet, they came in the sea, from the sea, to Benedict, Maryland. And then they started marching. Now, the American defense was basically was very chaotic. The Secretary of State was John Armstrong. And he believed that D.C. would not be attacked, yet he was wrong. We had General William Winder. He led a disorganized defense at Bladensburg. Now that is somewhat in the middle of these two, so let's put in another destination. Bladensburg. Bladensburg, Maryland. Well, look at that. They actually went a little bit north and then back down for D.C. So they came up to Bladensburg and fought the American troops. So William Winder came out from D.C. to meet him on the battlefield. It was the best place for battle. And remember, if you remember the British, they were all about going on a flat surface, a flat battlefield, and marching in order. Which means the first shots would take out the people in the front row. So I'm sorry if you're going to be in the front row. Stinks to be you. But that's how they did it. And they wanted to have a battlefield. Well, this was the battlefield that was chosen. Now, in August 24th, 1814, U.S. forces were routed in what would become known as Bladensburg races. It's a militiamen basically fled the battlefield. They did not have the full army. The full army was away at this time. And so the militia that was there, again, they didn't think they had to defend D.C. The militia that was there came down, and it didn't last long. They ran away. Now, nothing really stood at that point between D.C. and the British troops in Bladensburg. So there we go. This is how far it was. Now, if you can see, there's the White House. Come down. There's the cross. That is White House, Jefferson Memorial. That was not there at the time. Lincoln Memorial definitely wasn't there at the time. And the Capitol, which is right here. Right there. No, Library of Congress. Oh, okay, it's behind it. Yeah, Capitol. Okay, so that's what was so detrimental. That little jump right there. Let's take off this last piece. Let's see. Oh, the first one. From the time that they beat the militia and the militia ran, they had, what, 2 hours of marching, 3 hours of marching, straight into D.C. And what happened? Well, that's a whole nother story. Now, You got the British coming in. You have the Americans knowing that they're coming, and they vamoose. They get out of there as fast as possible, except for a few people, such as, let me see, what is her name? It was Madison. What is her first? Dolly. Yeah, so if you said Dolly, you got it right. Dolly Madison actually stayed behind. Now, what happened was, just so you know, it wasn't her. I'll give you the whole story. So basically, as I said, the British were coming down. You had 2.5 hours, maybe 3 hours, for the British to get down into D.C. At that point, they knew that they had to evacuate the president. First thing on the list to keep America safe and to keep the morale up was to move the president. They knew he was in danger. They needed to move him out, or the possibility he would have been captured. Now, at that point, what happened to Dolly? Dolly was his wife. You have James Madison, you had Dolly Madison. Dolly Madison decided to stay. She was not going to abandon everyone that was in D.C. She helped organize to get the people out. Now, of course, she did not do all of it. Most of the things that she did was taking care of the White House and getting some of the important things out of there. And then she realized there was something that was very important. So they got papers out, they got documents out, they got all these different things out because they knew it would probably be destroyed. The White House would be destroyed. They knew this. So she's in there and she realizes at the very end, the portrait of George Washington, we have to get that out of the White House. Why? Why would you put your life in jeopardy for a picture of George Washington? Can't you write it again? No, actually, well, at this point, Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison. By that time, Washington was dead. So, one of the most lifelike images needed to be preserved. Another thing is, it needed to be preserved because it was a national, it was a piece of art, but it was like a monument within the White House. So she took care to make sure that came down. Problem was, it was nailed up there. I mean, it was dead set attached to the wall. You were not pulling that thing off. So they actually had to cut it out of its frame, pull it down, roll it up, and run with it. Plus, try running away with a huge portrait. I mean, like, it's huge. Yeah, you're not going to do that. So they cut it out of the frame and rolled it up. And when they re-established it, they built on top of the picture that was cut out. So you wouldn't actually know. It was just a tiny bit smaller. Just a tiny bit. Not too much. So, during this time, James Madison is gone. Dolly gets everyone out of the White House. She's like one of the last ones standing. The last one to get everyone out. And then she heads out. Now, that's the tale. We're not 100% sure if it's exactly 100% true. But pretty darn close. Because she did stay till the very end. She was making sure that all the documents and everything else was out. There was a lot of other people there as well, evacuating everything. Because what happens when the British come in? The British walk in and start ransacking everything. Now, you have to think, okay, so these are British soldiers. One, they're not very well paid. Two, they've been ordered not to go to looting. But they were not strict on enforcing that. So British officers or British soldiers are like, sure, if I come upon something, I might pocket it. Something gold here, little diamond here, anything I can get to recoup some of the cost that I have to go through to be a soldier in the British Army. Okay, so that's their mindset. Not a good mindset, but it's their mindset. So they go through and they start looting some of the buildings. They start trashing them, throwing furniture out the window, throwing it down the stairs, burning the buildings, including the White House, including the Capitol. Two of the most important buildings in American history burned to the ground. Just total rubble at the end. And so there's a lot of things going on, and there's a lot of struggling here. Now, at this point, they have no one willing to fight back against them. So they basically walk in and tear it up. Their orders was retaliation for the Americans' burning of York, of basically modern day Toronto. It happened a year before. They burned it and left. So the British burned our Capitol, including the Senate and the House chambers. They set fire to the White House, then called it the Executive Mansion. It wasn't the White House. Well, at this point, it was Black House or Gray House because of all the smoldering fire and such. But so they torched also the Treasury, the Library of Congress, and the military buildings. Now, one thing that you need to know about the Library of Congress, even back then, is that the Library of Congress, that's the White House, not the Capitol. Where's the Capitol? Oh, Capitol's right here. Right behind it. Library of Congress, where is that? National Gallery. I used to know this a lot better. Okay. I don't remember. Actually, you know what? Smithsonian. That's because I'm not the right spot. There it is. Library of Congress. Right behind it. Okay. I knew it was fairly well how this is all set up. Been there a few times. Okay. So they come through, burn the Capitol, and then burn the Library of Congress, where all the documents were for basically U.S. history. One of the things that, not Dolly, because she was at the White House clearing everything out, but others were just jamming documents into their whatever wagons to get them out of there. A lot of the stuff got burned. A lot of it was destroyed. We don't know where a lot of it is, and some of our history is lost because of that. It's nothing we can do about it. And so the British at some point just say, you know what, we're done. We've burned down this building, we've burned down that building, burned down the important ones. Let's get going. So they withdraw. Now, as the fires rage, something unexpected happened. Yeah, this is actually quite cool. As the buildings are burning, a freak thunderstorm starts. Possibly even a tornado sweeps through the city. It basically blew out a lot of the flames, wrecked some of the buildings that were basically falling apart because of it, but they also killed British troops. Yeah, that's right. The British troops that were in there, they were hurt at this time. Some Americans believed that it was a divine intervention. Basically stopped them from burning down any more of DC. They could have done more, but they didn't. Within 26 hours, the British withdrew. They pulled out of DC and left behind a shocked but not broken city of Washington, D.C. Some of the people didn't even leave. Most of them did, but some of the people didn't even leave. So you have Dolly Madison taking the portrait rolled up now and running away with it to meet her husband and where all the other documents were going. And months later, they would actually start rebuilding. Now, if you try to rebuild Washington, D.C. right now, literally, it would, unless there is something big that changed with all the regulations and everything, it would take years, if not decades, to rebuild Washington, D.C. But the British were not done. They had left because of that freak storm. But their next target was even more strategic and more fortified. This is Baltimore. Okay, so now let's go to Baltimore. From D.C., Baltimore, Maryland. So actually went right past where they actually had the battle, and they marched another 14 hours. So leaving D.C., they come up, and up, straight up to Baltimore. Why Baltimore? Baltimore was a very strategic area, including one of the thriving ports that was still available. They went up there to, one, stop the port, two, stop the pirates that made that home. Sorry, not the pirates. They were not pirates. They were privateers. This is where most of the privateers made their base, made their home base. And they were the ones that harassed the British shipping. So, of course, the British wanted to stop them, wanted to intimidate them, wanted to kill them if they could. Now, the British hoped to crush America, its morale, and capture this main city after just torching D.C. But this time, the Americans were ready. Okay, so here we go. Baltimore. What happened? You had earthwork and trenches that were built up around the city. A strong local militia. Now, strong. They were not going to run like those that were supposed to be protecting D.C. They had a naval defense in the harbor, and most importantly, Fort McHenry. Now, where in Baltimore is Fort McHenry? Fort McHenry. Right out here, on the very tip of Baltimore. And there's actually, if you look, zoom in, there it is right there. This is where the American flag would fly, even though the fort was attacked overnight, just being bombarded for 25 straight hours. Fort McHenry would stand, and so would the flag, the American flag, tattered and torn, waving over top of it. So on September 12th, 1814, the British landed east of Baltimore. This is the same General Robert Ross. Now, I was wrong. They did not actually march up there. They took their ships that were already harbored. Now, they actually probably would have sent some troops by land, but they went out mostly by ship because it was well guarded around the outside. So Baltimore was well guarded and DC was not. Makes you wonder. Okay. So during this attack on Fort McHenry, something important happened. So September 13th. So there's over 1,500 bombs, rockets, and shells that were fired on this fort. The defenders, led by Major George Armistead, refused to surrender. They were going to go to the death. The fort's massive 30-foot by like 42-foot garrison flag. This thing was huge. So that's basically like 3 foot by 4 foot. Okay, so it wasn't that huge. We've seen bigger these days. But at this time, it was huge. Because remember, it was all hand sewn. The whole flag was hand sewn. Flags today can be like 3 times as big, but they're not hand sewn. They're all by machines. So it continued to fly throughout the night, through the smoke, through the darkness. Now, here's something that's really interesting. I love this story. I love it because it talks about the resilience of some people and their experiences that actual people had during this battle. His name was Francis Scott Key. You may have heard of him. He's actually the one that wrote, what? That's right, the Star-Spangled Banner. And why did he write it? Because of Fort McHenry right here. Sorry, right there. It's all opposite for me. Okay. Francis Scott Key was captured. He was captured and he was put on one of the British ships as a prisoner. He had come to negotiate a release of a prisoner. Basically, they were holding on to this other prisoner and ended up detaining him as well during the battle. So he watched all night from the ship that was bombarding Fort McHenry all night. So he has this very small window where he could actually see out. And it's so full of smoke, there's no flag. He cannot see the flag during the night. And it's also dark out. All he can see is explosions in the air, explosions on the ground would light up certain things, and he might grab a glimpse of it. And so during this time, September 14th, when the dawn broke on September 14th, he saw something he never could have imagined would still be there. The American flag was still standing, was still there, blowing in the wind. As the smoke had decreased, as it was blowing away from Fort McHenry, he saw it. And this inspired him to write a poem. The poem was titled Defense of Fort McHenry. It was later set to music and then renamed, what? The Star-Spangled Banner. That's right. It would become the national anthem of the United States more than a century later. Sorry. So, let's go over it. What did we talk? Oh, and as we go over it, I want to show you a picture. This is one we have for our curriculum. I want to show you. This is the burning of the White House. It's pretty spectacular. If you are listening to our podcast, it's the same one you'll find on the curriculum book. but it shows the British troops outside of the White House watching it burn. So, let's recap some of the things we talked about. The British retreated after the final assault on Baltimore. Actually, let's go a little bit further back. It wasn't just then. They attacked a militia that was for D.C. to defend D.C. Militia ran. They were not ready for them. They took off. And then the British troops came down into D.C., burned it. Wiped out a lot of the buildings there. They're very important federal buildings. Library of Congress, Treasury, White House, Capitol, and a whole bunch of others. Then the British changed tactics and went up to Baltimore because this is where the privateers were, and also it defended one of the major cities for the Americas. So they attacked Fort McHenry. They attacked it for 25 hours, and it still stood. They would not surrender. Now, here's the other thing. The British retreat, I didn't tell you about this before, but after the failed assault on Baltimore was the death of General Ross, and the strength of America's defense made further attacks too risky. That's right. Their general had actually died during the night, during the battle. And so, with that, and the fact that they hadn't done anything to the fort, they hadn't stopped the fort, they decided to leave. Too risky for them. So back home, the American public rallied around the defense of Baltimore, especially after the humiliation of Washington, D.C. being burned. That's what the British wanted to do. They wanted to make it humiliating for them. So the British leave. This moment restored national morale and helped solidify the belief that the young republic could survive, even against the world's strongest empire. The war would continue for a few months afterwards. Small battles, nothing like this. But the defense of Baltimore was the turning point that the Americans needed. Now, interesting, remember this. It was the Americans that declared war on Britain. Well, unbeknownst to them, 2 years later, after declaring war, France would be defeated, freeing up all these ships and soldiers to come straight after America. Now, of course, it wasn't all after D.C. There was another place that's very important, and that was New Orleans. Why New Orleans? Because it was one of the biggest trading ports in the West. Now, it was in the South, but it was for the West because it was the mouth of the Mississippi River. They wanted to take over New Orleans. We're not going to be talking about that today. We're going to talk about that next week. Yes, next week. Because on Wednesday, we're going to be talking about the Treaty of Ghent. That's the treaty for British giving up, surrendering, not surrendering, coming to a mutual agreement to end the battles. And the terms. We're going to be talking about the terms. But we're also going to be talking about, this is on Wednesday, someone very important to the War of 1812 and future America. And who is that? Who is well known of all the presidents during this time? His name is Andrew Jackson. You may know him for the Trail of Tears, but on Wednesday you're going to know him for what he did in the War of 1812 and how he turned the tides. Thanks to him, we have a country. You may not like the Trail of Tears, but there are some good things that he did do besides the Trail of Tears. Now, that as well, I think we discussed it in last month's unit, and that's when we were talking about the Native Americans. There's a lot more to the story than people would like to tell you. Go back to those episodes and listen to them. Or go to the curriculum and read about them. It's fascinating. It's very important because it's not clear and cut and dried as Andrew Jackson was just pushing out the Native Americans to go off. No, the land was sold. Oh, but we're not going to that. And it was agreed upon by Native Americans. Now, it might not have been the leaders of the Cherokee tribe, but to the government, it was enough. So, that's a little teaser for what we're going to be talking about, but I have an engagement question. Here's an engagement question for you. Please put it in the comments below, email me, whatever. Love to hear what you have to say. If you had lived in 1814, when events wouldn't move you, Let me say this again. Which event would have moved you more? The flames that overtook Washington State? Was it the fort or the flag flying over Fort McHenry and the attack on Fort McHenry? Was it the battle before Washington, D.C. was burned? What would have made you move more? To join the battle? To feel a morale boost? I want to hear what your thoughts are. Please let me know. Email me or put them in the comments below. Until next time, thanks for joining us, and we will catch you next time. Okay, see ya. Take care. Bye. If you have any comments or questions, add them to the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow, actually. Take care. Bye.